Hey there, welcome to Film in the Blank. My name's Ian, I watch a lot of movies. Here's everything I watched in a month. I started things off with Cuckoo, written and directed by Tillman Singer. Scream Queens, y'all can kick rocks because it's echolocation queen season. Cuckoo's a thriller heavy on vibes and light on follow-through, which is enough to deliver some engaging sequences and tension building, but most of the heft slips through your fingers by the end. It's a great showcase for Hunter Schafer, and Dan Stevens and his little ocarina of crime really stole the show more than probably helped the overall film. Color me generally intrigued to check out what Tillman Singer does next. 3.5 stars. Up next, 1978's Eyes of Lower Mars, written by John Carpenter and David Zelig Goodman, and directed by Irvin Kershner. This is basically Scream, except all the characters are 3 decades older, somehow 3 times as horny, and makes a third as much sense. The film follows a high-profile and controversial photographer played by Faye Dunaway, who starts seeing visions of a serial killer murdering people in her life and must track down the killer before it's too late. Although technically co-written by John Carpenter, Eyes of Lower Mars is actually a massive revision of Carpenter's script, so much so that he claims to have nothing to do with the finished product. The supernatural elements didn't work for me much at all, and you gotta figure John Carpenter would have been able to integrate those aspects much more successfully. The spooky power ballad Barbra Streisand sings that opens and closes the film is so good though, and I've been humming it ever since I heard it. It's also the only remaining clue that Barbra Streisand was originally supposed to star in this before pivoting away. All due respect to the professionally unhinged Faye Dunaway, but I know in my heart this would have been way more entertaining if it was Babs solving supernatural murders, because of course it would have been. 2 stars. Then I watched 2006's Little Children, written by Todd Field and Tom Perrotta and directed by Todd Field. Little Children is a film that hits me harder each time I watch it. Todd Field has suburbia's perverse sense of morality and social bonds dead to rights, and he uses it as the overarching theme for a story oozing with sexuality, distorted intentions, and shattered social norms. It's one of my favorite Kate Winslet performances. She turns her character of bored housewife Sarah into someone likable and sympathetic, but also devious and self-destructive. It's a delicate balance that harkens back to other hard-to-define performances like Gena Rowlands in A Woman Under the Influence and Julianne Moore in The Hours. With this and the pitch-perfect Notes on a Scandal coming out in the same year, something horny must have been in the water back in 2006. 4.5 stars. Next, some sci-fi with 1958's I Married a Monster from Outer Space, written by Louis Vitz and directed by Gene Fowler Jr. This is a fun B-movie that doesn't have a ton to say beyond the typical body-swapping story, but it does have some choice scenes of alien guys rolling their eyes about having to go home to their annoying wives, and some dogs who have the forethought to surprise creep crawl towards the aliens before they maul them. 3 stars. Then a film with a title I half agree with, Strange Darling, written and directed by J.T. Molnar. I was thoroughly amped for this based on exciting early buzz and was so massively disappointed. Setting aside the genuinely head-scratching message of the film and the bland hyper-colorization that added pretty little, everything felt like a gaudy student film complete with bumpy split diopter shots, awkward pacing, and the belief that shooting on 35mm automatically makes your film good. If your story is only intriguing when you tell it out of order, your story isn't intriguing. Christopher Nolan's Memento being told in reverse is massively intriguing, but even if that story was told in chronological order, there's still oodles of tension and intrigue in every scene. If you told Strange Darling in chronological order, maybe half of it would retain some tension, maybe. Also, every scene was a page too long. Christ. 1.5 stars. Then a film that hit me like a metric ton of bricks, 2011's Oslo, August 31st, written and directed by Joachim Trier. After seeing Joachim Trier's utterly captivating film The Worst Person in the World, I finally got to explore another of his films, this time the mournfully meandering Oslo, August 31st. Following a shakily recovering drug addict as he attempts to re-establish a life he can feel anything for, the film unfolds across a single day, yet it paints a picture of a once vibrant, quickly fading life, wonderfully embodied in Anders Danielsen Lee. I really hate when a film can absolutely devastate me without being able to prepare myself for it, but I wouldn't change the emotional ride that was my experience watching this. I can already tell this is a film I'll return to quite often. 4.5 stars. Then some Agnes Varda with 2017's Faces Places, directed by JR and Agnes Varda. This is a sweetly simple doc that showcases Agnes Varda's irrepressible ability to identify and value who people are. So many moments in this go beyond heartwarming to soul-restoring, which makes that ending Jean-Luc Godard sequence all the more shitty. Gonna be a while before I watch another Godard film, fuck that dude. 4 stars. Up next, 1947's Great Expectations, written by David Lean, Ronald Neame, Kay Walsh, Cecil McGivern, and Anthony Havelock Allen, and directed by David Lean. That eye-popping production design? Forget about it. The camera tricks and dreamy cinematography? Thoroughly forget about it. The stodgy plot? That you can actually forget about. 3.5 stars. Up next, guard your face, it's Alien Romulus, written by Fede Alvarez and Rodo Sayaguez and directed by Fede Alvarez. I thought this was just alright. I think the premise was better than the actual story ended up being, but even though the film itself didn't wow me like I'd hoped, I still appreciated Kaylee Spaney, David Johnson, and mastermind Fede Alvarez putting their whole Romulusi into it. And speaking of Romuluses, minor spoiler warning, but I would have loved to be in the room when they were conceptualizing the look of the new creature to figure out how they landed on a Mercedes logo for the genitals. If it's not the gutsiest piece of corporate synergy, I have so many questions. 3 stars. Up next, a solid documentary, 2018's Minding the Gap, directed by Bing Liu. This is a great balance between heartwarming and heartbreaking, and it even made me get why some people like skateboarding. Quite the feat. 4 stars. Up next, some Sidney Poitier with 1961's A Raisin in the Sun, written by Lorraine Hansberry and directed by Daniel Petrie. This is one of the best play-to-film transformations I've ever seen, with all of the interweaving brilliance of the play still on full display, while also giving room for the power of film to bring even more out of the characters and their inner turmoil. The fact that A Raisin in the Sun was overlooked entirely at the Oscars is criminal, especially since it could have easily run the tables in the acting categories alone like A Streetcar Named Desire did a decade earlier. 4.5 stars. Then the movie TVs in Best Buy will be playing to show off the range of color for the next several years, The Wild Robot, written and directed by Chris Sanders. I thought this was refreshingly funny right from the get-go, and the animation style thankfully deviated from the ubiquitous Pixar model to great effect. I also haven't been this drawn to a voice performance in a long time as I was to Lupita Nyong'o's. She brings a lot to a literal robotic character and gets you to feel. Such a smart casting decision. 4 stars. Then Scream Like Your Life Depends on It is 1959's The Tingler, written by Rob White and directed by William Castle. This is a pretty kooky B-movie about a scientist who discovers an organism called the Tingler that lives in each of our spinal cords and kills us when we're really scared unless we scream or something. There was a nice moment of color usage in an otherwise black and white movie, and a memorable scene where our scientist calmly narrates his own drug-fueled panic attack, as you do, but other than that, this falls apart pretty quickly. 2 stars. Then I watched the little horror indie Oddity, written and directed by David McCarthy. It's pretty obvious where things will end up from the beginning, and characters swing violently from super smart to super dumb, but the atmospherics, filmmaking, pacing, and scene work are really great, especially that chilling opening scene that hooked me instantly. 3.5 stars. Next, another thriller, Blink Twice, written by Zoe Kravitz and E.T. Feigenbaum and directed by Zoe Kravitz. First off, Zoe definitely did her homework in bringing her debut film to life with her direction, tone, pacing, and editing all congregating in that tense sweet spot all thrillers strive for. I can't say much about the plot without spoiling, but I will say I wish there was more there. The story has 2 main beats that it hits hard and effectively, but I wish there were more hazy stair steps between the 2 beats, so the audience doesn't go from completely in the dark to completely up to speed. Some of the most engaging moments were right on the cusp of those 2 beats, so I wish that section could have been beefed up significantly. Naomi Ackie gives an impressive performance in the lead, but unfortunately her co-lead Channing was punching above his weight with some of his more demanding acting moments. If another actor with more substantive acting chops snagged his role, things would have been markedly more engrossing, particularly in that dizzying last act. 3.5 stars. Next, 1971's Walkabout, written by Edward Bond and directed by Nicholas Roeg. Compared to Peter Weir's stunning Picnic at Hanging Rock that uses the Australian outback as an ever-changing kaleidoscope of meaning and discovery, I thought this drama about 2 children abandoned deep in the outback was fairly one note. Still well shot and good enough narratively, but for that title I was hoping for much more. 3 stars. Up next, the balance must be respected, it's The Substance, written and directed by Coralie Farjat. Simply one of my favorite films of the entire year, with a career-defining performance from Demi Moore, a striking whip-smart script, and innovative direction from Coralie Farjat. I'm hoping the Oscars continue their trend of recognizing genre films like Everything Everywhere All at Once and Promising Young Woman, and give The Substance the Oscars bath it rightfully deserves. 4.5 stars. Then over to 1978's Blue Collar, written by Paul Schrader and Leonard Schrader, and directed by Paul Schrader. Paul Schrader's debut directorial feature about 3 disgruntled factory workers who robbed their labor union starts off pretty weak, but the second half flips into a much more interesting and gritty story that finishes strong, including a pretty fantastic freeze-frame last shot. 4 stars. Next, 1996's Hard 8, written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. This was the last PTA feature I'd never seen, and it's charming in its cynical outlook and bursts of emotion. Unsurprisingly, this is at the bottom of his filmography for me, mainly due to how simple the story is, but to go from this to Boogie Nights and Magnolia in the next few years, what an evolution across the board. 3.5 stars. Then the indie darling His Three Daughters, written and directed by Azazel Jacobs. I wish I connected with this more than I did. It's well acted and had some really nice scene work, but it lacked the untethered quality that made Azazel Jacobs' previous film French Exit so confounding. Oddly, I think French Exit was too untethered to be truly successful, and His Three Daughters felt too small without that quality. 3 stars. Up next, watch out, it's 1992's Bad Lieutenant, written by Abel Ferrara and Zoe Lund, and directed by Abel Ferrara. Harvey Keitel's corrupt, careening lieutenant is far and away one of my favorite characters from a film I saw this year. He's the kind of guy who will shoot his car radio when the baseball game he's listening to turns sour, and the wild moral lines he draws for himself give him almost infinite freedom to stumble through life unchallenged. Putting his core belief that you can bend your morality to fit the specifics of any situation up against a morally resolute nun who forgives a heinous assault on her is genius. Getting to watch him see his outlook disproven so clearly leads to one of the most devastating undoings of a character in film, and the ride is nothing short of pure cinematic entertainment. 4.5 stars. Then I watched 1934's The Gay Divorcee, written by George Marion Jr., Dorothy Yost, and Edward Kaufman, and directed by Mark Sandridge. From the opening scene where Fred Astaire does Kristen Wiig's "Don't Make Me Dance" bit, and then dances like a maniac to pay for his restaurant tab, to the 17.5-minute musical number that seemed to go on forever, The Gay Divorcee is begging you to love it. I settled on just liking it, so 3 stars. Then my third Spike Lee joint of the year, 2002's 25th Hour, written by David Benioff and directed by Spike Lee. When the film's overarching message starts to become evident in the last 20 minutes, things start to feel important. I wish that feeling came much earlier, so a lot of the long scenes with side characters felt more integral to the story. By the end, you can see why those scenes are there, but that doesn't help me watching those scenes in real time thinking, why is this scene taking so much focus? There's a lot to unpack thematically in this in relation to 9/11, from Edward Norton's internal blame mirroring the country's internal blame over 9/11, to the shared external blame at other groups and types of people, trying fruitlessly to figure out somehow what poison pill element was added to the American melting pot that led to 9/11. The themes themselves are more interesting than their execution, sadly, but Terence Blanchard's memorably morose score and Rodrigo Prieto's deliciously desaturated cinematography kept me pretty engaged throughout. 3 stars. Then, Warm Up the Church Organ, it's 1962's Carnival of Souls, written by John Clifford and directed by Herg Harvey. It's not hard to see how influential Carnival of Souls has been on everything from Night of the Living Dead to Final Destination, with its somber world building and fracturing of reality and fantasy. I don't think the overall film landed with me as much as the many later films it inspired, but glad I could finally pay my respects to one of the OG psychological horror pillars. 3.5 stars. Up next, a blast from the 80s, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, written by Alfred Gough and Miles Miller and directed by Tim Burton. This felt like Tim Burton and company threw 2 big nostalgic handfuls of spooky spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck, and surprisingly an impressive amount did. It never moved past affable popcorn fare to anything close to memorable like the original, but still a good time at the movies. 3 stars. Then another chuckle fest from Lars von Trier, 2000's Dancer in the Dark, written and directed by Lars von Trier. This is a trademark horrifying nightmare of a Lars von Trier film where he puts a woman through abject hell, but this time, it's a musical. Or as much of a musical as Lars can allow. Bjork really blew me away with her performance. She's so innocent and defined by her morals, but Bjork breathes enough life into her so that she never feels one note. Really great work. 3.5 stars. Then a film that's long been on my watch list, 1979's Being There, written by Jerzy Kosinski and directed by Hal Ashby. Each time I see a new side to Peter Sellers as a performer, I'm amazed. Being There gives him the opportunity to explore his most grounded and nuanced character, and he still mines the laughs nonstop. Fantastic. 4.5 stars. Then 2019's The Lighthouse, written by Robert Eggers and Max Eggers and directed by Robert Eggers. I had an itch to revisit my least favorite Robert Eggers film before Santa brings Nosferatu for Christmas. I liked it marginally more, and it's probably his strongest film thematically speaking, but for me, it still doesn't top The Magic of the Witch or The Spectacle of the Northman. 3.5 stars. And I finished the month out with Netflix's Will and Harper, directed by Josh Greenbaum. If you cut out 20 minutes and added some elements of magical realism a la Dick Johnson is Dead, this would have really been top-notch. As it is, it's still a solid doc that means well and often hits the right notes. 3.5 stars. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on these movies, any others I should check out. What corporate logo would you make an alien's genitals out of? Also stay tuned for other great commentary videos, reviews, video essays, and more. You can check me out on Letterboxd at Cineramadome24 or on TikTok at Film in the Blank. I appreciate you liking and subscribing. See you next time.